On this glorious, glorious day. And Julie's going to do the welcome to...
Well, the acknowledgement. I acknowledge that we're on the land of the Tharawal and Durga-speaking peoples, and I acknowledge all the elders past, present and eternal. Thank you.
Thank you for that. That was easy. I could have done that.
Is your mic working?
Is my mic? I can't hear? You'll get it sorted?
Yes, she's got it. I can hear you.
You can hear now.
Speak
Oh,
up.
yes, I can hear. Yes. I'm going to sing in a minute, and Kim offered him this wonderful sofa to take his clothes off and do it like. And then I took over, but I'm not going to do that. As much as you might wish. Here we go. Yes, this is going to be a rival session. I'm introducing Julie Janson and Kim Scott, and I don't know, some of you will know both, some of you won't know a lot about either, so I'm going to read their accomplishments. I'm going to give you an introduction which will take a minute or two, and then we'll launch into the discussion. Julie's career as a playwright. She's a playwright and poet, and it began when she wrote and directed plays in remote Northern Territory communities. She's now a novelist and an award-winning poet. She's a Burra woman of Darug Aboriginal Nation. She's a co-recipient of the Ujuru Nunuku Poetry Prize. Sorry about all this pronunciation.
You're fine.
And in 2016, she's the winner of the Judith Wright Poetry Prize. Her fellowships include Developing Writers Fellowship, Australia Council Asia Inc., too numerous to mention in fact, and she's been the recipient of many grants and guest writer fellowships. She self-published 2 novels before the debut of her critically acclaimed book Benevolence, which is published by Magabala Books 4 years ago, and it's going to be a trilogy. But we'll talk mainly about the second today, which is called Compassion. She's written and produced 10 plays, including 2 at Belvoir Street Theatre, Black Mary and Gunjis, and 2 other plays, and 2 plays published by Aboriginal Studies Press. But we will talk about mainly Compassion, which follows Nell, who's the daughter of Mary in Benevolence, the first of the trilogy. And as to Kim, sorry, have I?
No, use just the microphone.
It's at your deepest bosom. So we'll have to retrieve it.
I'm surprised.
I'm
We're only
Melbourne.
5 minutes in. So she's had a bottle of champagne at 11 o'clock tonight.
No, we're very fun. Yeah, anyway, but Professor Kim Scott is Professor of Writing at Curtin University, twice winner, as you probably all know, of the Miles Franklin. And he's widely known for his literary fiction. He's bringing what both Julie and Kim bring something entirely new and relevant to Australian literature. Terribly important. And if we can get to some aspect of that and why you should read their books, rush out to the bookshop afterwards I hope after today. His debut novel, could be, but sometimes in France they say debut. His debut novel, True Country, was 1993, and his second novel, Benang, was 1999, and both are published by Fremantle Press to critical acclaim. Benang won a slew of prizes, including the WA Premier's Book Award, the Miles Franklin, RAKA, Kate Chalice. His subsequent novels, That Deadman Dance, 2010, and Taboo, which is the one we will concentrate on today, met with equal success. His work has been translated and published internationally. His literary contribution extends well beyond fiction. In Kayan and Me, an oral history co-authored with Hazel Brown, he shares a powerful story of Indigenous identity, community and belonging. He's published children's books, essays, poetry, articles and criticism. And somebody that I've taken this from, was it Wikipedia, said his article, A Path Away from Alienation, is a must-read. So you can...
Can't remember that one. I disagree.
Oh gosh, just sit there and be quiet.
Right.
His generous, original and determined commentary highlights the significance of Australia's rich First Nations legacies and continues to shed light on our nation's essential path to reconciliation. A member of the Noongar community, Kim's contribution goes well beyond written legacy too. Once a secondary school teacher, he's worked extensively in Indigenous education and the arts, including the coordinator of Curtin University's Indigenous Enabling course. And you were awarded a Centenary Medal, and you were 2012, you were West Australian of the Year. Wonderful. We're going to do readings, or you're going to do readings, but before that, David Marr finished his wonderful speech last night, a very entertaining speech, insulting the furniture. They have, is it the same furniture, do you think, or did they? The same? I thought perhaps it was manufactured in Berry. There's a particular sort of furniture that has to be commented on. Anyway, he finished with a very sober comment about the politicians are not going to do anything about the past or race relations or anything, and with the failure of the referendum. And he said it's up to the artists and writers to do it. And I thought you might just comment on that, because you are, people like you are at the cutting edge.
So we don't want to say anything, but perhaps...
It's our turn.
Okay.
We have to front up here.
Good.
Great introduction, thank you very much. Look, I don't know that it's our responsibility. I certainly think it's in answer to why we got such a huge no vote. I know in our community, Uncle Bunja Smith, who's a UN elder, worked very hard with a number of other Aboriginal people and people from different backgrounds in out of the town of Maruya, which is just down there on the south coast on UN country. And it was a terrible disappointment for all of us. And Uncle Bunja, I think, did 50 talks. And he's a full-on community man, full-time working now for the Snowy Authority. And I never saw a man work so hard and so passionately, only for, he'd say, I'll turn up anywhere for a scone and a cup of tea. And I think Uncle Bunja proved the point that a community people will lead the way into kind of, we hope, the change in attitudes. But yeah, a very hard time for Aboriginal people, a very hard time for all the people who supported us, with which we're extremely grateful for. So a tricky question, but it's the thing of move on, okay, that happened, we're moving on now to the next phase. What do you think?
Look, I'd like to think it is up to creative people and creativity generally to move things along, by taking risks, by exposing the threadbare nature of most of the narratives that we rely upon, to talk about identity, to talk about belonging, and perhaps to be leaders, which often means you just head off on a direction and no one's following. To take those sort of risks, I think. Yes, so maybe he's right. But it takes we need the diversity of different skills to break through, to make something new of our world.
When I was preparing today, I was reading background of Kim, because I don't know Kim very well, but and I was amazed at how similar, having worked in some remote communities, originally trained as an English teacher, and also went on search of language, and a lot of working with community people and younger people, how very similar my journey towards writing came, because I only really started writing because I wanted to give voice to some young Indigenous people who were in my class at the University of Sydney at the Koori Centre, and they wanted to audition, young Aboriginal girls wanted to audition for NIDA. This is back in the early 1980s. Didn't have a hope in hell of getting into NIDA. You had to be blonde with blue eyes and having done ballet since you were 5, apparently. Anyway, but they wanted to audition, and we looked at the wonderful plays of Jack Davis to try and find speeches for them, or Bobby Merritt, and there were very few female monologues. So I began to write monologues for those young women so that they had something to audition with. And that was really the beginning, plus being a drama teacher for many years, including with all the Koori students and the Murray students, which actually started me on that road to writing. Yeah, I owe it to them. Yeah.
But you both, it's probably worthwhile talking about both your backgrounds too, because when did you really think seriously about who you were, where you came from, you know, in the wider, you know, aspect of culture? Perhaps because you didn't really, you knew about your heritage, but
I think it's part of trying to be creative. I like to give up ground, actually, rather than assert who I am or anything. But it's true that when I was young, my father told me I was of Aboriginal descent, and that's the best part of it, which is a prickly sort of thing to say. But I was, so that's, I was born in 57, so that's the 60s, he's saying that sort of thing. He himself was the only surviving child to a woman born in an area infamous, it's later become apparent, for historical massacres and regarded as taboo for a lot of people in the Aboriginal community. Not everyone. There was 9 Noongar people there in 1901, 20 years after a white bloke was killed. It started retributive killing. And I like to think that my father, the Aboriginal Affairs documents talk about his generation being successfully dispersed across the southwest and living among white people. He, at something like 23 years of age, returned to the south coast from capital city in Western Australia with 4 kids under 4, and probably trying to be as good a father as he could. He couldn't give me language or a handful of words, and we were living in the suburbs where people were moving off the reserves and missions. He was probably reconnecting with people as best he could. We go camping on country. But I like to say that, in fact, I'm really proud to have come from that sort of beginning and to do some of the things that I'm engaged in now, which writing is a part of. But for me, the literary writing is trying to articulate that silence and that resentment and that pride. He died in his 30s. As I said, he was the only surviving child to a woman who also died in her 30s. So so initially, and I'm trained in literature. When I arrived at university, there was no niche of Indigenous writing. There was a few writers appearing. There was not really any genre like Aboriginal history. So a lot of my efforts were trying to articulate that. And without going on too long, Benung was a lot about a response to going into the State Archive to try and answer some of these questions, and reading a book by A.O. Neville, Chief Protector of Aborigines from 3 decades in the 20th century, and seeing the correspondences between a book of his, Australia's Coloured Minority, its place in the community. In the acknowledgements, I wrote that down as their place in our community, which probably tells you how I read it. And then trying to use that language, perverse as I am, but I think this is part of the creative spirit, trying to use that very language, which I'd been educated in, you know, I had a degree in literature, and seeing what I could do to make some more space. So I said I had the narrator saying I may well be the first successfully white man born in the family line. And that's to talk about those genocidal plans, and also to talk about all those local histories that were obsessed with, it seemed to me, the last full-blood Aborigine and the first white man born, and drawing a line there. And a lot of my work is trying to reach back into that past and build up some momentum to carry into a future, and you know, some other more powerful narrative that might be more sustaining and nourishing. But I fear I go on too long.
No, it's but you should.
Well, just sit there nodding, listening to Kim, you know, because I think when I first read the Deadman Dance by Kim Scott, I realised the power of including Aboriginal language in a narrative. And so by the time I wrote plays that already had quite a lot of Aboriginal language in them, when I came to writing novels, I look back on how impressive I found that he was able to use language in a way that we still, the people who didn't understand Noongar language, and it is a bit of a trick.
No, that's worth talking about.
You know, it's people say, how do you do it? Well, you know, if you look at the way Kim did it, I learned a lot about how to bring that into my novels so that I didn't need a glossary. I said to Magabala, I would like a glossary at the end of the book, and they said, no, you're going to have to write it so people learn the language as they go through. And at first I thought, oh, this is a real task, but I actually understand that the reason for that now is to kind of compel people to see the repetition of those words within your narrative. But that thing about writing back the colonial story from the subaltern side, you know, which is what they talk about in Indian literature, writing from the subaltern, the person who was oppressed by the colonial authorities. And the power of writing back Australian stories and rewriting those histories in our own way from the direction of what our fathers, in my case my father as well, from where he came from, and to try to understand his journey as a very dark-looking Aboriginal man, but in a family with only his brother looked like him and all the rest were fair, and everybody just said, oh no, there's no Aboriginal blood in this family. And my mother even said, you know, when I married him, if I'd known he was Aboriginal, I would never have married him. Mum was of English descent, you know. You know, that writing back the story, and there's so many stories to write back against, to show the other side. But I also spend an awful lot of time around non-Aboriginal people, you know. And I try to understand the two sides of our history. It's not simple, all Aborigines good, all white people bad. I mean, that's such a simplistic way of writing back. And I'm much more interested in interrogating the why people did things and what they understood to be right at the time. Even if I look back and I think a whole lot of murdering scoundrels, I do want to understand. And I'm often inspired by some of the greats of English literature, like Charles Dickens or Catherine Gaskell or Thomas Hardy. And I love to write really kind of vivid characters that really stay in your mind, and I'm inspired by those kind of writers as well. But it's a big mix it all up, eh?
What are you? Who inspires you? I mean, is it a mix? I mean, because you.
I'm largely inspired by my wife, who happens to be in the audience. You know, writers, same. You know, I grew up with a literary tradition. I know Ben was a lot without being derivative, I hope. You know, Rushdie, Midnight's Children was a really important book to me.
Yeah.
I like Nostromo, Conrad's Nostromo was an important book to me in terms of historically representative forces in the historical novel. Rushdie's good because it's historiography as well. So at that time, those things inspired me. But look, I feel like pointing out, you know, 7 years since my last novel, so I'm under false pretenses. And it was Mary Canane, the organiser, I think, the main organiser, I think, or the director of this festival, asking me to come, and she helped me out a lot in moving from small-time publishing to a major publisher, and the benefits that come from that. So I'm certainly inspired by, I grew up, I'm an avid reader. I was as a child, read the cereal packets and then move on to books and so on. But I am, without being trite, I am 7 years since the last novel, because I put a lot of work into language revival, and I've moved away from, I've tried to develop a sort of split focus, forgive my pretension here, and try and write literary works that interrogate the narratives available to us and try and find something new. And also trying to rebuild from a small position, trying to rebuild language and trying to rebuild community and connect to landscape. So, beginning of this century, with some elders, coming out of the book I wrote with an elder, Kai Young and me, she gave me quite a role and put me with her brother on the land council and her siblings, recording a little bit of language with me, giving us songs that, for a range of reasons, they weren't able to hand on to their own children, such as the trauma people carry and internalised shame, and what's the point of that? So and some of those narratives, certainly some of those songs, inspire me enormously. And in my pretentious way, I have sometimes attempted to articulate, is there a parallel between whatever happened in the Northern Hemisphere, the Renaissance, shards of old statues and fragments of language, how they re-energise a people and a cultural tradition. I try and do, it's ridiculous really, try and do something like that with the little Noongar community that I know, and there's Noongars that would say I don't know nothing, but there's others that, like those people, like Hazel Brown and others, who where I want to build that trust. I want to build that trust and that love with language and narrative and song. And we've managed, sorry to go on so long, and we're so starting with Benung interrogating the archives, and then trying to do write novels that work as novels do, and use them to shine a light on certain other sort of work. That Deadman Dance references one of those publications in that other work. Because I realised at one stage, first Miles Franklin, thinking, you got tired. This is this post-colonial thing. Only a few Noongar readers. And in fact, these novels are cultural artefacts that travel into the wider world, and at best, in many instances, I have people saying, well, good on you, Kim, you got those books going out there, and they're all reading them. But that Benung, I got it the other day and read the first 50 pages and have to give it away, brother, too hard for me. So what do you want to do? All you can do is sort of literary stuff. So working with language revival and creating narratives in some sort of collective sense, and bringing, one of my, if I can go on a little bit longer, Julie, is that all right? Now, one of the things I'm proudest of, really, is things like Auntie Hazel gave me an exercise book full of words she'd collected in her own distinctive spelling at her father's sick bed as he was on his way out, and he died at 100 years of age. And so starting with a scrap of paper like that, and then recording it, reorganising it, alphabetic, and grouping it, and get her to read it aloud. And then some archival stuff from the 1930s collected in Albany in the International Phonetic Alphabet that was in the States until turn of this century, comes back here, take it back to the children of the linguist's informants, if you can follow that. In one instance, there was a couple, their dad had told a story to this linguist in 1930. Their dad died, or they were separated from their parents and brought up outside of Noongar country. In their 50s and 60s, we reconnect, thanks to Auntie Hazel and her siblings, bring them back in. And we published a book with one of those children, Russell Nelly, then as a co-author, so telling his dad's story that he only got from a scrap of paper, and his sister illustrating that story. A wonderful story of transformation of dogs turning into seals. Then we found, through the workshops and the paperwork coming together, cross-referencing what people carry, we found the area where those dogs rolled into the sea. They leapt through a fire. We regenerated that song. That's the dogs leaping through flames into the ocean. The story has another part where, and in the notes it said, oh, that stone head is still there, where the brother hears his dogs. The other brother's taken them away. He hears his dogs. He can't see them. Looks out to the ocean. There's seals now. In the same sound. Dog his head is the word in Noongar, this story. And at the base of the slope, there's seals looking up here. And so that is the sort of thing I'd like to do more and more of. The song, the community, rebuild us all. And then you're touching, energy in a story, the pulse of the landscape, I think, for which print and any language is just a cipher. So, that's only one little success, and maybe it'll be the only one. There's some other promising examples like that. So that's my excuse for, only one novel in the last decade. If I can get it. I might just be a lazy bloke.
Well, you're obviously lazier than you, because you've written 2 in the last 4 years, so...
Good powerful woman.
Well said, I've got competition here. But you also you're writing against the canon, and you're taking your great-great-great-grandmother, Nell, Eleanor, or you call her Eleanor, and her story starting in 1835, and taking it, to 1860.
Yeah.
This amazing young girl. I was blown away by this story that is full of life, and it opens. In fact, I was thinking as you were speaking of the dancing on the ground. We want to make the ground come alive.
Wait.
Yes. So tell us your
I went down this long journey of following Kim, so I've got to bring myself back to reality. I wrote the first novel, Benevolence, looking for the 3 times great-grandmother. Found very little about her, so of course I made most of it up. And found some very small pieces of information, like a birth certificate that indicated that a gentleman who possibly could have been her father was actually the same name as the Reverend of the Anglican Church in Windsor in the early 1800s. And I thought, gee, that's a good story. My husband said, I couldn't possibly have been the Anglican Reverend. I even got a picture of him and I put it up there. I thought, great-great-great-grandfather. There he is, big black beard and a long black cassock, looking very severe. But look, you get inspired. When I decided to write a sequel to Benevolence, and I think the word sequel is incorrect because it's a standalone novel, but I spent a lot of time researching the whole history of Aboriginal Sydney when I was working for Professor Peter Reid on the History of Aboriginal Sydney project. And when I looked up in Trove, be careful of Trove if you're looking at it for family history. Some true abominations about your family will hide in Trove. And I looked in Trove and I put her name as Mary Thomas, because I changed the names in my novel, so that people don't go, Mary Thomas didn't do that in 1835, it was actually in 1836. People do this kind of thing, a lot of pedants in the world. So there she was, she'd stolen cows, and the last time she came up in Trove in 1853, she'd stolen a herd of horses. And I thought, what a woman! And in those days, in the 1850s, stealing horses was a hanging offence. You'd even have tattooed on your forehead, horse stealer. You know? And so I thought, gee, she's brave. And each time she had a male accomplice. And that male accomplice ended up being sent to the Parramatta Lunatic Asylum. Well, the Parramatta Lunatic Asylum in the 1850s was where people were chained to the wall and beaten and fed gruel, and everybody died. So that's what happened to him. And she got off every single court case. She was found to be not guilty. And I thought, how on earth is she managing to do this? You know? And I thought, well, my dad had the gift of the gab. I've got the gift of the gab. She obviously had the gift of the gab. And she talked her way out of the court cases. And then I read some information about certain young Aboriginal women who'd gone to court dressed in a crisp white frock with a big bow in their hair and sat there innocently going, oh, you know, I don't know what happened and I'm innocent and I don't speak English or whatever it is they had to say. And I imagined that she'd kind of been the actress. So this kind of idea of her with these concrete bits of information about it is what stirred me to begin to write. And I'd also written a play called Black Mary some years ago about the Aboriginal bushranger who was the paramour of Thunderbolt the bushranger. And I'd done a lot of research about her, a Warramai Biripai woman, powerful, powerful woman. And so a lot of those ideas also came together when I wrote Compassion. And I decided to just kind of go for it and write this powerful novel. It's been described as a rollicking yarn by one person. Another person said, it's so full of chaos, it really upsets me. And I'm thinking it's either one or the other. But I think it's a mixture of all those things. But other people have said, how come she had a life that she kept on moving on and moving on? If I look back in the records, that part of the family never had anywhere to live. They were all servants, they were all illiterate. And often in the very early days, they married convict men who were also illiterate. They lived along rivers as splitters of wood, and the women were always servants. 3-4 generations of women as servants. And my very first jobs was I was working for the St Ignatius College. No, it wasn't St Ignatius. It was St Joseph's College, serving tables when I was 14. And I think those ideas of a history of Aboriginal women going down through the family who are all servants, it kind of inspires me to write back against the narrative that all Aboriginal women were beaten, raped, enslaved, victims. And I thought, well, no, that's not the way I see the history of Aboriginal women in our family. I see them all as very strong survivors and women who had big families. Most of the kids survived. In some cases, some of the children were taken away by the Benevolent Society and taken off to the Randwick Home for Children and never seen again, ever. No one ever saw them again. And that all comes together in a novel.
You did actually, you had a quote from Alice Walker at the beginning, Alice Walker, this is saying, writing saved me from the sin and inconvenience of violence.
That's true. Yeah.
I mean, you must feel rage and violence about, of course, this is what I guess generations of, and I don't like this word trauma, I think it's a difficult word, it's becomes so unreal in a way because it's too general. But you do, it's a wonderful evocation of a woman with agency, sexuality,
yep.
With everything.
Yes, sex sells.
Sex sells, but it was like the historical novels of Jock Sarong or Toni Morrison came to mind as I was reading this. So I was reading it with, I haven't read anything like this before.
Thank you.
And it was wonderful. But look, you were both going to, we should talk about two because both of these, Tilly is if you can remember, Tilly is the main girl, she's good, who carries everything really, who has to carry the history of the men, their violence and whatever, as well as the connection to the land and through the language. Because you do talk at the end of that about the connection between land, language and blood. These are you talk.
And communities, I prefer to say blood.
Blood, right. Mm-hmm. Yes, but there's another aspect of blood too, because it's about a massacre. You actually went to this. I'm going off on track because you want to read. I mean, you do want to read.
So I went to,
you went
partly informed. So as part of just trying to work things out and realising that one descended from this so-called taboo area, I went and slept in the homestead that is the centre piece of this massacre yarn, because it's a changing world, and the people owning it now that bought it in the 60s remembered my Noongar family, and they read my writing, and they're, I hope, are reconfiguring some of their thoughts. So they invited me and a cousin to go and sleep at the homestead, which I delighted in accepting that offer. My cousin said at the time, because I want to confront and change the whole story. I don't want to be a victim forever, so you've got to sort it out somehow, is how I think about it. My cousin said at the time, what are other Noongars going to say? We're here in taboo country. And I've already mentioned it, it's not taboo to everyone, and you have to address these things. So I said, well, if we're in any way connected to those people, those Noongars here, they're going to be glad to see us back. Forgive my arrogance, but I've got to believe this. And it is true. It sounds very new agey, this, but so I slept really well. One of us was sleeping. There's two white brothers. One of them, the stories goes, were raping a Noongar woman. He'd probably been married in or attempted to be married in, but he was having his way with every Noongar woman he could come across. And the other fellow, and he was killed. And then the other fella, the brother, the Winchester rifle was invented about 8 or 9 years before this. They would go, they're shooting everyone, every Noongar they could see. Probably not a few Noongar women in that emerging town. And poisoning waterholes and so on is the story.
This is 1890 we're talking about, isn't it?
1881 is when the white bloke was killed. So then for a long time after that, I think the retributive killing continued. So when we left the next day, I think these things matter. We were driving up, we had to cross a little creek. As we came through the creek, Mallee hen came out and walked out in front of the car, and we had to stop the car. They build these big nests, and so without thinking, I thought I'd turn back, and I tried to follow it because I wanted to see the nest. And then I realised I'm going to get lost, and if I get lost here, what are people going to say? Returning to his ancestral country, and he got lost in the bush. I cannot handle that. I paused, and then I might be making this up, but in the small clearing there was these tiny, delicate flowers blossoming. And at the time I thought, that's about the size of a body, probably nothing to do with things. So I went back to the car, we drove on, and then a whole mob of emus ran. We had to stop the car again. They're pounding across in front of it, their feet throwing up dirt. And we thought, what's going on here? We continued to drive, and as we got to the gateway, when you enter moving out of the property, there was an eagle. This is true. There was an eagle on each gate post down at eye level, And as we drove up, it wasn't until we got to the gate post that they lifted themselves heavily and flew away. And for me, that is like what people talk about, the land and those spirits trying to say, yes, you did the right thing. And I find those sort of things really inspiring. I think that's probably in Taboo. I can't remember.
Yes, it is.
Yes. And I did a little film script about it because it's a mind-blowing sort of thing when it happens. And thank you is what you feel like saying.
The land, yes.
The possibilities that are there when you start breaking up, as I said, the threadbare narratives that we rely on to sustain us and try and get to something bigger.
Something else. Do you remember that Andrew McGann wrote a novel called The White Earth? That is remarkable, don't you think? Because he was trying to do something.
He was trying to do that. Yeah, look, I didn't like the novel when I read it. I've only read it the once.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's trying to do something like that.
But I was thinking about what you were talking about before, about this mixture of we share this history. We can't all go back, Sorry.
I want to talk about that mix and hybridity, big time. I'm right into that because first contact, what I read in where I come from, a little tiny place, is that amazing, is the generous, accommodating nature of Noongars, and there's reasons, instead of this being ambushed and hijacked by the genre of military history. I don't want that. When I see this enormous generosity and accommodation from my Noongar ancestors and their cross-cultural sophistication and the enormous talent, Bishop Salvado, New Norcia, Western Australia, talks about, he meets bunch of Noongar kids, 10 years old or so. He writes his alphabet in the sand, Spanish alphabet. He says within a very short time, I say 15 minutes, that might be wrong, they have written that alphabet in the sand, produced the sound for each symbol, and then done them in mirror image as well. He talks about someone watching, a Noongar kid watching someone knit for a half an hour or an hour, and then takes the knitting needles and the wool and knits. He talks about a Noongar kid, 15 years old, learning how to use a sextant within a day, and he's been trying to teach sailors for months to do this. So, I want that culture back as best as I can. And they are greedy for any new cultural experience. They also, sorry to go on if this is an obsession of mine, there is a report in the colonial documents around Albany of a Noongar fellow going with one of the colonists on an expedition a few days, and the diarist talks about the Noongar guide taking an interest in the expedition journal and even collecting flowers that he didn't know about, it's outside of his territory, and helping press them between the leaves of the journal. When he gets back, he performs a recitation in an oral tradition of that expedition journey, and the diarist is observant enough to notice that he structures it according to the expedition journal, episodic, marking each day. So those things, that's hybridity, that's diversity. Any new cultural source, I'll try it on and see how it shapes the spirit of me or my place. And that'll help me jumping on sailing ships because they extend our kin and geographic networks, learning the other's language. There is a story of when they got to Albany, my hometown, to the colonists, to establish a military garrison. They were greeted by a Noongar who said bonjour, because the French had been visiting for 2 decades. I don't know if that's true or not. I haven't been able to find the reference, but I like the yarn.
But I was just thinking too, because there's the Winmars. Winmar is the Noongar, and you talk about the Noongar as very self-assured and confident in particular, and certainly not, this victim.
No way.
Nicky Winmar, for those who
absolutely
know, is the famous footballer. That marvellous photo. He just lifted up his shirt and said, "This is me. I'm and
do what
that's
you can."
Noongar, yeah, very.
So that agency we were talking about before, bring out that agency.
That agency.
And listening to Kim speak, I've also had the privilege and opportunity to go and work in communities where the Alawa people at Minyeri, which is a community which is about to be fracked, right, in the Northern Territory, about 300 kilometres southeast of Catherine Town. And I went there as a first-year out teacher, 52 children in a caravan school with the ages between 4 and 18, nobody could read and write. bit of a challenge for a first-year art teacher who'd only studied drama method at university. And I had a young husband with me at the time, different one to what I've got here. He's up the back there. And what was amazing, the children would line up outside that caravan school, the whole 50 of them, at 7 o'clock in the morning, often soaking wet, because they're actually living under bits of tin and bits of plastic and bits of bark and little tiny shelters. And they'd be soaking wet, and the first thing they'd do when they come in is that you give them dry clothes, you know, because we had electricity, because there was a generator at the cattle station owned by a Hong Kong consortium. Mm-hmm. And I'd say to the children, who owns this country? And they'd go, hello, I do. Just because, of course, they do. But it was a Hong Kong consortium at the time. And these children so eager to learn, just desperate to learn, seizing on the alphabet, seizing on the books, and seizing on the colours and the paints and the texture colours and the books to go out and draw the most magnificent drawings. And but also the opportunity to, in my very young years as a teacher, to experience traditional ceremony and to be invited to women's ceremonies that in that particular area are no longer performed, you know. And I learnt so much in that year and in the following years when I went on to Elko Island for several years with Yolngu people, more than I could ever have learnt in my 9 years of going to university in terms of what that deep knowledge that I had the privilege of learning, and a lot of language as well. But and I think that kind of knowledge is what I apply when I write a historical novel about the Hawkesbury River people, because I have to kind of go back in my mind and try to imagine what it was like for Darug Barrabarungal people at that moment when white colonisation comes in and they have to meet it and survive within that colonisation if they're not massacred. But just to finish on that, I will say about the Minyiri people now, and I do plead with you to join the support to stop the fracking of the Northern Territory. They have one great big billabong there, which is a sacred billabong, which is named after a little female goanna, Waterbill. My daughter was conceived near that billabong in circumstances I won't go into, and she is Waterbill, the goanna. She now is a social worker in Darwin, working with Indigenous people and other underprivileged people. And that billabong is the sacred heart for Minyiri people, for the Alawa people, of which there's a 400 people community there now, who now own the cattle station and operate it as a going commercial concern, thanks to the Indigenous Land Corporation having bought it back for them. But the fracking that is happening now in Elliott, and is about to happen at the Rainbow Billabong down there near Mataranka, will crack the aquifer. And when it cracks the aquifer, there will be no sacred billabong, there will be no Hodgson River, there will be no Rainbow Billabong for people who visit through Mataranka to swim in, which is a sacred billabong. It will all go. And in fact, hardly any of that money ever comes back to Australians. That's Origin Energy and Tamboran, which is a Louisiana fracking company, taking that gas from beneath those communities. I know I'm off point, but I feel so passionate. I feel so passionate about this. And my new crime novel is set in that area too, with Auntie Jude. And the fact that when I saw a map of the Northern Territory a few years ago, and I don't know where I was to see it. I think I was in Darwin, and someone said, "Have you seen this map? This has got circled all the communities that are going to be impacted by fracking, and every single one of them was an Aboriginal community. You know, not Catherine Town. You know, just." And I just looked at it, I said, this can't be real, what I'm looking at. Does this make any sense to anybody? And I think that the frackers thought they are a pushover. You know, we can buy them off with a couple of Toyotas and a couple of $100 to a few elders. And I know the people from Minyiri, the Alawa people, you see them on the internet, they're begging and pleading people to support them in the court cases that they're doing with the Environment Centre from Darwin, attempting to stop this. But the fracking, have you seen what the fracking things are like? They're enormous, great big drills that go 5 kilometres down in the earth, and then they turn right, and they dig right down under the earth, 5 kilometres down. And they take the gas, but in doing that, they crack the aquifers. Anyway, sorry.
Yes, I think now I've got it. My Tuolingo's just said I'm being demoted. I've got, but it also gives me the time, 7 minutes. So you've got 7 minutes worth of questions. So if you
We didn't read.
You didn't read. Do you want to read? Would you prefer to question or read? You can have one or the other.
I agree. You first.
I've already been talking.
No, he's been talking to it.
Okay, I'll just read a little bit. Okay. Chapter 1, from Compassion. Remember, a lot of my titles to my books are ironic, right? Okay. Chapter 1, 1836, Bandy Bandy Prospect Farm, Nullawilly Waibala. I saw a glittering billabong with 100 swimming black swans. I thought, they are Muldoon, whispering my mother's language. One white swan drifted in their midst. My heart cried out to the bird, asking how it came to be amongst the others, so alone and wildly strange. I counted other mother swans with fluffy cygnets while my master loaded his gun to shoot and eat those birds baked with potatoes in beef dripping. I wondered if the meat would be white or black. That'll do for now.
Oh, read the next because you talk about the dance.
All right. Oh, no, I think the dancing was on the other
Yeah.
page. Right. You want a bit of dancing? All right. So,
Yeah.
it's too long.
Is it?
Yeah. No, don't worry.
It's lovely.
I'll just read the next.
have to-
Well, one more chapter.
We'll lock the doors.
One more paragraph.
Lock the doors.
One
Don't
more
let
paragraph.
anyone out.
There ain't no dancing, I can tell you. The dawn mist slipped into my lean-to and I heard heavy breathing. I shifted on my straw pallet bed and felt a heavy weight on the blanket. I sat up. A dead black swan lay on the blanket, its red beak open and neck oozing crimson blood. The webbed feet, like grey bat wings, dangled over the edge. I screamed and he stood and pointed at me. A little present for my girlie. My master, Farmer Bryant, laughed as though he would burst. I was 10 years old and I wanted to kill that man. But Farmer Bryant was sneaky and swift as a snake.
Can I just say on that too? I will let you read. But
It's
you,
7 years ago. It's an old
but you did tell me over the phone. You said you started. I think it was on the phone. Last week you said you first started to write because of rage.
Yeah.
And the rage is wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you for the writing.
I do write humour and sex too, if you like that.
Human sex. So your reading is
yes, from early, and I'll try and make. There's a truck has crashed. A couple of people crawl out of the cab. The truck's on its side. A man and a young woman. The two of them stamp their feet on solid ground. This will be about page and a half. The two of them stamp their feet on solid ground as if reassuring themselves. They listen to the wheels spinning and a luxurious whispering sound. Wheat slowly spilling from a vehicle. Come close, closer. A small pile of wheat is growing beside the trailer, fed by a thin, grainy spout from the upper corner of the tarpaulin. Golden, it has both the look and sound of great wealth. The tarp slips a little so that the thin stream becomes a golden shoot, and then the tarpaulin pulls away like an upside-down stage curtain, and a wide, low wave of wheat makes the girl step back once, twice, 3 times. She stops, transfixed by something in the trailer as the wheat continues to flow around and behind her. Imagine a figure sitting in a deep and rapidly draining bath. Head and shoulders appear, then the upper torso, knees, in the trailer. Beginning with the dome of a dark skull, a figure is being revealed. The figure slides a little, shifts. The tarpaulin slips again. The golden grain continues to flow across the ground. The figure begins to rise. It must be the moving grain, but it seems as if the legs lever it upright, and it steps from the upturned trailer and stands swaying with the high weight of its skull. The girl, the figure, they stand facing one another, feet invisible beneath the grain. The wheat dust, the light of the sandstorm, the after effects of the accident. What is it the girl sees? Something like a skeleton, but not of bone. At least not only bone. The limbs are timber, The skull is timber too, dark and burnished, and ivory dentures, stained as if by chomping, inhaling, gustatory human life, grin exaltation. A gauze of gold dust and light mote swirls from its broad shoulders and around the rippling cage of its ribs. Long shanks lever the pelvis, itself a solid thing of smooth river stone and timber glowing at its centre of gravity. Kneecaps too are smooth stone, but the rest is bone and polished timber and woven grass, seeds and brightly coloured feathers and even fencing wire. Cords of sinew, of neatly knotted fishing line, and is it human hair, meet moistly at each mobile joint. The figure sways toward the girl, led by the heavy skull, and then glides to her, arms low and open, each beautifully defined and delicate hand held palm up, its whole being as a smile. Hands clasped, firm, warm, uncalloused. And now the wind gathers strength. A melody plays across the visual rhythm of those ribs. Hollowed, meticulously carved spaces begin to whistle and timber limbs begin an accompaniment. Thunder cracks and booms. It rumbles in the riverbed. The figure teeters, begins to move, to slowly fall apart and maybe tumble. Thank you.
Thank you both. It's been really enlightening.
Thank you to you too.
And,
Yes,
wonderful. I cannot, because reading these books, I was very nervous about doing this because it's not my. I'm terribly into high culture, as you can tell, being from Melbourne, and these actually made such
Welcome
an
to
impact.
high culture.
Oh, you're just such a smart ass, really. Anyway, I recommend that you do read, seriously, and just don't go for the entertainment these days.
Oh, it's there too.
No, yes, but well,
Sex and humour.
that's right, sex and clothes,
Clothes, yeah.
and
It's all-
very handsome Englishmen that she shouldn't have slept with.
No, she shouldn't have. No, don't tell anyone.
But I really knew it, so we understand these things. So, yes, I recommend them. And thank you both, and thank you all for coming.